And so you're going to have a release of all of those demonic spirits that are in with their celestial mafia godfathers out of the pit prison to be released. That then ignites, because it's not part of the first woe, but it's an extension of that first woe in Revelation 9, this 200 million man army of some sort of horrible looking hybrid horses and riders. All are hybrids that aren't human. Well, who needs a soul and a body designed for war? All of these disembodied giant spirits, they want to interact with the war. Who would be one of those? Likely Gog, right? And Gog, even after the flood, as you look at the history of that name of Gog, that comes out of the Herculidean bloodline, the Herculides as they call it.
Aloha and welcome to another show, guys. Before we get started, please subscribe, hit that bell, and share this with someone who loves to dive deep into conversations like this. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that on Patreon or buy me a coffee. Links will be in the show notes below. And today we're sitting down with Gary Wayne, best-selling author of Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 1 and Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. Gary's research explores the intersection of biblical prophecy, ancient history, secret society, and how those threads show up in today's world. Now, Gary is joining us remotely while on vacation, so this is an audio episode only for those who are watching on YouTube. The screen will be black on Gary's side. But in this episode, we go deep into Gaza and the Philistines, Ezekiel 38, Days of Noah, Israel, and Catholicism. Now you can find Gary at Genesis6Conspiracy.com. That's Genesis, the number 6, conspiracy.com. Now settle in, guys, because this one is packed full of information. And let's welcome Gary to the conversation. Enjoy the show. Awesome. Thank you. Well, Gary, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure having you on. Every time you're here, the audience just loves you, and for good reason. Your research is always deep and thought-provoking, and you connect dots that most people never even think to look for. The last time you mentioned you were going to step back from interviews to focus on book number 3. But from what I've seen, you've been busier than ever. So I really appreciate you making the time for us again. I wanted to start with something that's on a lot of people's minds right now. The conflict in Gaza. It might seem like just another headline, but I think when you look deeper, it starts to echo stories we've seen in the Bible. Could today's conflict in Gaza be the latest chapter in an ancient war that began with David and the Philistines and the giants of the Bible?
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be back with you and your audience. And yeah, I think when we look at current events, we should be careful in looking at what's going on in a couple of ways. One is to see whether or not there's anything that we should be aware of that comes out of prehistory that has a connection to the end time, but not overreach as well, because the graveyard of people doing predictions on things, as with this war, I think it's important. It helps set the geopolitical stage for the fig tree generation, but it's not World War III as it was promoted to be. It's not the Gog War yet. It's just a part of a sequence of events, but it's the historical aspect that you reference that is, I think, quite important. So The Philistines, I mean, that word comes from and is the source word for Palestine. And so the Philistines, for people who aren't all that familiar with them, is that they were in the land of Gaza and the five cities, the five Pentapolis cities, in the time of the Exodus, which Israel didn't fight. And they were probably one of the most warrior-like nations of that time. But in the time of David, David settled with the Philistines, completely defeated them, um, and put that enemy, which was probably one of their greatest nemesis, to rest in that period of time. So the Philistines, we should give a little bit more context. So Philistines are mentioned in the time of Abraham, um, and also again in the time of the Exodus. And it's not that history is wrong. It's just there's migrations that go on, and there's two different periods of time, but they are essentially the same root people that are part of the Hamites that are originally migrating to Egypt and then to Crete, to the island of Crete, to the Minoan Empire. They would be best understood in the context and the lens of the Minoan Empire, and would have fled that island not because they wanted to, but because of the Santorini events in about 1550 or so BC. And so they needed to go somewhere else. Now, when the Philistines migrated to Crete, they intermarried with the Aboriginals that were there. And these were dark-haired giants. And they bring with them that alliance of people with them. And so, in the table of nations, we're familiar with the Casualhim, whom the Philistines come from. The Casualhim, I am giant plural, are part of that confederacy of giants on Crete. There's a couple other ones that we will see as peoples and specific roles that are played with the Philistines as are recorded in the Bible, which are the Pelathim or Pelethites, as they're recorded biblically, that we don't get a real good explanation for other than they come with the Philistines, and the Cherithim. So we have at least three other groups of giants that are coming with the Philistines to expropriate Gaza before the Exodus and are there by the time of the Exodus. And so much so, they are going to drive out a lot of the Avim, not all, a lot of the Anakim giants, not all. And then they're going to absorb within three cities of those Pentapolis, the Avim and the Anakim, into that confederacy. So this is the soup of human hybrids and giant tribes, which I've just listed five, reinforcing them, and who knows on how many other there might be, but those are the ones you can sort of reach out and touch that David is going to be up against. And that's why when I say they're one of the more fearsome nations, you just have to look at that, who they are, what they did. I mean, they took that out in the time of the Egyptian Empire, and the Egyptians didn't try and stop them from doing it. That's how powerful that they were. And that this Philistine group is a group that Israel marched around to the east side of the Jordan River with Moses before crossing in, instead of going straight up into the covenant land. And as they had explored through the spies, on at the time of Moses and in Numbers 13, where the spies, bringing back reports of giants, but yet they're going to go in and war with them, but they're going to avoid the Philistines. Again, I think it doesn't explicitly say, but I think the faith of Israel needed to be built over a long period of time, not only the 40 years, but then the preparation of dealing with wars. But it's not like they started off easy, because east of the Jordan, they took on King Og and King Sihon, and Og had 12 Pentapolis fortress networks. In other words, they had 60 cities grouped into five, just like the Philistines, who only had five. And Sihon had at least 35, maybe as many as 40. We don't get the exact number, and I'm into the 30s on counting the cities in Sihon's. And then they cross into the covenant land, but yet they still don't attack the Philistines. Um, and they're going to plague them throughout the age of the uh, judges. And I give this sort of context to get to the guts of the question, or the heart of the question. Is this some sort of transgenerational feud? And the answer is yes. So one of the first nations that attack Israel coming out of the Exodus is the Amalekites and the Amalekim, with the Amalekites having a vested interest in wiping Israel from the face of the earth, because if they do, as descendants of Esau through Eliphaz and Timnah, the Horim giant that creates the hybrid giants, and they go and live amongst the Amalekim giants in Petra, would inherit all of the inheritance of Israel, would inherit all of the Messianic blessings, and all of the blessings of that would be going with the nation of Israel. So they are stirring up other nations into an oath. And we get this oath that we know is sworn by the Amalekites, but we're also told about, and I talk about in both books, is how they loop in all the other giant nations to step forward and war with Israel to wipe them from the face of the earth, or you're going to lose all of your land. And the Amalekites don't really join in after their major whooping in the time of Moses. They're now enticing all of these other giants. So we get this conspiracy oath that's talked about in Psalms 83 with David. And he lists these nations that have this conspiracy. Now, this is quite a bit downstream, over 400 years from when the oath is originally taken, and the other nations are lining up to war and wipe Israel from the face of the earth for their uh, celestial mafia godfathers, the fallen angels, as I like to call them, to get the blood on the offspring hands as opposed to the gods, so that they're not directly held accountable for that. And this is 400 years later, and it's still happening with David, and he's still dealing with all of these nations and trying to put that to bed. So this is a transgenerational oath, just as in the time of King Saul. Part of the oath that he took for the kingship was to wipe the Amalekites from the face of the earth, for declaring that oath and bringing in all of their allied partners, which were the giant nations of the covenant land. And Saul doesn't complete that kingship commission and loses the kingship to David, who does take care of the Amalekites and finishes the job, and then takes care of the other nations. And so it's this ongoing, what I call transgenerational oath to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. And it continues even down through the age of after Israel is lost into the nations, and just with the southern kingdom. And it continued right through to World War II. We should expect to see that type of thing starting to boil to the surface in the end time. And in that confederacy of nations, you have the Philistines that are listed, and the inhabitants of Tyre, which is Lebanon, where not Hamas, but Hezbollah is located. Now, I'm not saying that all of these people in Lebanon or Gaza are descendants of giants, because there's been so many migrations and people moving, but there's a leadership there that seems to carry forward this tradition. And it seems to be in the DNA. We have an example of the blood oath even with the Amalekim, when there's some descendants of Agag, the king of the Amalekim, as listed in Numbers book of Numbers in the time of the Exodus, you have Haman the Agagite, which is an Amalekite. He's a bloodline royale in the Persian court who's trying to have the king wipe Judah from the face of the earth while they're in exile in Babylon. Like, this is something that we should understand that hasn't gone away for whatever reasons. It could be in the DNA, or it's just the way things happen in the Middle East is nothing seems to be ever forgotten. So, but it might as well be in the DNA because it has the same sort of result. So Hamas used the excuse to wipe Israel from the face of the earth this last go around when they were fearful of Israel doing a sacrifice of the red heifer, and was intending on doing it at the Wailing Wall, not in the temple yet, but enough that they would say, we're going to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. And why would they do that? Well, it's in their constitution that they refuse to renounce, that they want to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. Not quite the same language, but the exact same sort of result. Hamas has the same oath that they want to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. So, yes, I think we should expect that there's something to this. If we're in the end time, this blood oath is going to resurface. And we're going to see a Holocaust against not just Christians, but against Judah. Judah gets kind of a free pass for the first 3.5 years, but not in the last 3.5 years. And they are going to receive the wrath of the Antichrist after he stops the sacrifices on a wing of the temple that they're trying to sort of the Jewish people are trying to forcibly right now do. And I think to try and bring the end time a little bit closer. I mean, they're almost like they're trying to speed things up there on both sides. So this is going to be something that's going to continue. It's like birth pangs of the Gog war that's coming, right? That happens just before the midpoint of the last 7 years. But we're not there yet, but expect more of this. And it's absolutely horrible what's going on in Gaza. I mean, absolutely, you cannot say otherwise. I don't know how you resolve the situation, though, because if you leave those organizations in power, nothing changes. It's going to happen again. But that's also not justification to wipe people from the face of the earth, right? We have to get a long perspective on this earth. And so the people have to want that change on both sides. And the people have to, in Gaza and in Saudi Arabia, or Yemen, I should say, but there's a lot in Saudi Arabia as well. The people in Syria, the people in Lebanon, the people in Iraq, Iran, they have to want to change that leadership that has that perpetual war gene in them and that blood oath to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. And even though I do not like the things that Israel does at times, I understand the threat that they're up against, and you have to take it seriously, especially with somebody like Iran who is trying to develop nuclear weapons. They said they want to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. Based on the actions that we've seen, do we actually believe that given the opportunity, people who have sworn that kind of oath and that kind of make those statements so often wouldn't use it? Of course they would. That's why they want it. They're not there to necessarily beat up on their neighbors. They're all focused on driving the Jewish people out of the covenant land, from the ocean to the river, from the sea to the
Yeah.
river.
Was that what Hitler was trying to do as well? The Nazis?
Yes, yes. The Aryans, as they believed, and they believed they had the genealogies as the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans that come from Atlantis, Tula, as it would be understood in their northern Norse mythos and the Volkish ideology. They believe they are the natural born enemies of the children of God of all forms, not just the physical ones, but anybody who's Christian. And so once they were done with the Jewish people, they would have turned on all of the Christians. He was an Antichrist-like individual as a Fuhrer, with a polytheist universal religion that he wanted to overlay on the world called Ariosophy, supported by secret societies who wanted to create the New Age and the Third Reich, a thousand-year reign. And they seem to be receiving all sorts of help from the invisible ones that develop their weapons. So he was very much an Antichrist archetype as to what we should expect in the end time. And as brutal as birth pangs are, as brutal as some of the things that we saw in history that do not reach Armageddon level, they are there to help us understand what's coming. If we're prepared to pay attention, if the world would pay attention and say, no, we don't want to go there, then it could probably be avoided. But the world won't do that because it's run by the fallen angels and their spurious offspring. So there's no way they're going to stop moving into the direction of that kind of showdown. And the passage that people should really understand so that we put things into perspective, because we don't have to like what's going to be happening. But it's going to happen. But it's going to happen on God's timetable, not everybody else's timetable. And in Ecclesiastes 1, it says, nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. And as you move on into about verse 17, and paraphrasing, is the understanding of this wisdom only brings grief and sorrow. So we've seen what's going to happen, but in lighter levels. And I would even say, even maybe lighter level than what happened before the flood. So you would imagine that there would have been a giant Antichrist figure before the flood, whether it's Atlas or Orion, that is sort of raised up to that level, who is trying to create the new golden age and the world empire and our demigods before the flood, but they did not destroy the world by fire, at least. And they may have had the capability, but the flood came maybe to prevent that destruction by fire that's reserved for the end time, as 2 Peter 3 tells us. So um, that was an intercession by God, and God intercedes so that we all have an opportunity to leave our names in the book of life. And that is what's dictating the timetable, not number mysticism, not what people want the dates to be. And only God knows the dates of when this is going to happen. And that's because he's Alpha and Omega. He knows the beginning from the end. He knows how this plays out. So getting back to the question and bringing it to a close, yes, we should understand things especially in the geopolitical nature. And then later, when the false religion starts to come in that universal mystical religion perspective, but with the geopolitical scenario, what we see is a manifestation of what we don't see that goes on in the background. It's the spurious gene of the people who run the world in all nations around the world, who are wanting to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, and they're wanting to bring about the end time. They don't necessarily always work together because they also know there can only be one family that's going to rule the world. There can only be one. And so that rivalry is always at play, and they're always trying to get there before the other rivals get there. So they work directionally at times, but they're still competitors.
Wow. Daniel 12:4 says knowledge will surge at the end. Does today's leap in AI, genetics, space tech, does that tie into Jesus's warning that the end will be just as the days of Noah?
Oh, I think so. I think so. And in book 2, I learned from book 1 that um, and particularly after I released book one and I got out into doing interviews and media and social media, I learned how people twist scripture like a pretzel. And in a lot of cases, to have people not understand what's going on. And, when we look at the days of Noah, people will say, well, the only thing that that means is it was like the flood and that people were godless and they kept on marrying and intermarrying and didn't realize the end was going to come. That's the only thing we can take from that. And I'm going, well, it's asking us to learn about the days of Noah. Those are certainly a couple examples, and he's listing all of these preternatural events that he listed, that he even said heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And we just sort of wash away the reference to the days of Noah. So I think it is referencing all of the things that happened in the days of Noah. And Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. So in the book of Luke, as he's talking about the days of Noah, he connects that to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that were doing similar crimes to what was going on before the flood, which includes giants and what the giants did as well. And so that's a destruction by fire, which is now linking that it, with the transitional prophetic allegory of it's going to be like the days of Noah with that type of destruction, but this time destruction by fire that 2 Peter 3 talks about, and all of the destruction that we get that's talked about in the book of Revelation and elsewhere, with how horrible it's going to be with what goes on in the last 7 years. So what was going on in the days of Noah, 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood? Well, you have the gods that are walking amongst us and reigning amongst us. And after the days of Noah, we don't see them visibly. They're still in control of the world as the invisible ones ruling from the council of the gods, but they've been restricted. They're not physically interacting. And now I think they're going to do that as we get closer to the last 7 years, because their time is short and they don't care about the consequences at that point in time. They just want to get this thing done. And they also created giants. So somehow, some way, in the days of Noah, we're going to have to deal with this idea of giants, whether it's the descendants who are currently running the world with the royal bloodlines, or new creation of giants, or somehow giants that were spared in the world, off the world, in stasis, in another dimension, however, that will resurface. We don't exactly know what it will be, but if it's like the days of Noah, then it would be creation of giants after the flood. And with the offspring gods like Baal, who created the Raphaim giants, we know those same crimes were still going on. And those were the giants that were ruling it over Sodom and the five city pentapoles of Sodom and Gomorrah. And they're worshiping the Baalim council, who created the giants, right? So you just can't sort of ignore all of the context, and it's the giants who caused all of the violence. War is the ultimate violence that ultimately causes the flood coming, and perhaps they were going to bring destruction by fire back then if they were permitted to continue. And it's also technology for the end time. And how do we get there? Well, you introduce Daniel 12. That would be one reference to it. Some people might say, well, it's just knowledge of scripture, but I think it's a broader use there, where it would be, yes, knowledge of scripture, but knowledge of more things, because it's identifying a higher level of understanding. So to create the weapons of fire that could destroy the world before the flood, that's angelic technology that would have been introduced. Sort of goes back to what I was talking about, what happened with the Nazis in World War II. They were receiving that knowledge to build for themselves the weapons and to develop that technology, but that intellectual dynamite came from the invisible ones that they talked to. So again, another sort of archetype of this quickly advancing knowledge, as like we're seeing with AI and other things, that is extraordinarily reckless and no limits that are available. So this technology could have also had the ability to corrupt all of the flesh and everything on the earth. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's the Hebrew word chakath, which means to pervert, to ruin, to decay, to destroy. So you have to have angelic DNA technology to be able to corrupt all of the flesh, right? And only the 8 were preserved spiritually and genealogically pure, in my understanding of that, to start that reset once more and give more time. So somehow they had this additional knowledge that we're just catching up to. They built structures we can't build yet, even to today, in terms of the size of the blocks, the masonry capability, the uh, celestial alignments, the sacred geometry, the earth ratios, and on and on and on, and locations are related to each other. And it's a it's an it's a technology that has been hidden from us, and we're expected to believe that they were somehow able to do this by rolling these blocks on logs. And we can't do that today. So I mean, it's just unbelievable how they get away, because people have been taught not to critically analyze. So yes, we have that technology that's happening. This is all what was going on in the days of Noah. And then again, shortly after the flood, which is why the offspring gods were sent to the pit prison as well. So what should we expect? Yes, it should be as horrific as what led up to the flood catastrophe and the Sodom and Gomorrah catastrophe, and maybe even worse, because it's now going to be permitted to play out to the end.
Wow. Ezekiel
So
38.
so in book one, so in book two, I open up book two on that chapter and then show all of the references to the days of Noah, so people can link the message and the prophetic message that runs through the New Testament and the Old Testament.
Wow. Ezekiel 38 describes a future invasion of Israel led by a figure called Gog from the land of Magog. I guess he's a powerful leader from the north. Could this set up a false Armageddon? Could it be like a fake final war happening first to fool the world into thinking prophecy was fulfilled before the real battle comes later?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to have a completely falsified, contrived resume of fulfilling what Jesus was destined to do, and before Jesus does that, right? For all of that to sort of come into play. So there has to be some sort of resurrection. And of course, he receives a mortal head wound in Revelation 13, but lives. So something preternatural happens there with the assistance of the fallen angels. And so another significant thing is if he's going to introduce an age of peace and put down all of the enemies under his feet, he's going to have an Armageddon war, or an Armageddon-like war. So now you roll that forward to Ezekiel 38, and you have this Gog individual. And Gog is, as you take that back into the Hebrew and the Greek meaning, also means an end time Antichrist-like figure, not the Antichrist, Antichrist-like figure. And of course, to do the deception, he has to have a legitimate Antichrist figure. And there's going to be multiple Antichrists in the end time as well. But this Gog one rises up to a higher level of notoriety. And Gog, he has no biblical connection. and he pops up in Ezekiel 38, and then there's a pop up again with the millennial war after Satan is released at the end of the 1,000 years. So Magog shows up because it's Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech, as he's described in Ezekiel 38. And so Magog is listed in the table of nations and the descendants of Japheth. And you also have a bunch of other nations. It's a very, very large alliance of nations, but I'm going to stay focused on Gog here because this could go 1,000 different directions. I'll show some discipline, I hope. And so Magog seems to have probably had his name changed to represent what they did, as many other nations may have had some of their names changed, like Elam. So when the Shemites of Elam intermarry with the original Aboriginal people after Babel, that's the Olamim giants, which is Elam, and likely took that name on. There's other examples, but just to throw one out. And how I get there is before the flood with the parent gods that I mentioned a few minutes ago versus the offspring gods that rule after the flood. You have the god of the sea named Iapetus, who is going to and it's a very similar story to the Poseidon story in Atlantis, and I think Poseidon probably inherits that mythos from Iapetus for after the flood, because Poseidon's an offspring god. And Iapetus marries Clymene and produces Gog, Magog, and Albion as giants before the flood. So either these giants are going to survive the flood, or giants created after the flood are named after giants before the flood, or both. Because that's where we get the name Gog from. We don't get that sort of biblically, but yet he represents these beast people, the spurious offspring of the fallen angels who rule this world with their perpetual war gene, that we see coming up with that being understood with Gog in the end time. And so this has a relationship to giants, and this is the same war that happens in the last days in Ezekiel 38, so sometime in the last 7 years. And it's before second Exodus that shows up in Ezekiel 39 after the burial of the Gog army. And second Exodus happens in the last 3.5 years. So it's before that. So now we're getting a timing that suggests it just might be the war that is Antichrist is going to use. In Daniel 11, when you read verses 21 to 31, that's the first 3.5 years when Judah is doing the sacrificing on a wing of the temple. For other translations, it might say overspreading or extremity, but it means the same thing, extension onto whatever temple is going to be used for that, for the first 3.5 years, whom Antichrist negotiates this covenant, and he starts his ascent to power, where he's crowned at the midpoint. And just before he comes to power, this overwhelming army is wiped out before him. So now we have, in the rise of Antichrist, this overwhelming army. We have a war that is Armageddon-like, so much so that many Christian people who do a lot of work in eschatology will say that is the Armageddon war. But it's Armageddon-like, and even has the same sort of descriptions. And it should, because it has to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. So now things are starting to shape up here, that there is a war that he's going to use, and then he's going to take his armies, because he takes credit for winning that war, whether he actually wins it or not. He's going to take credit for winning that war. And it's in one of the credentials of Antichrist, as it says in Revelation 13, who can make war with the beast? And it's more than just winning that war. He actually takes his war in Daniel 8:10 into heaven, which is the same timing of the angelic war in Revelation 12 with 3.5 years left when he's coming to power. So he's going to throw down some of the starry host and again add to that resume of who can make war with him. Even the angels loyal to God cannot, or the aliens, as they may be classified, loyal to whomever they're going to call the evil god of the universe that they call God. Um, so now we have one war, but can we get closer? And I think we can. So in Revelation 9, we have a war that is going to happen after the opening of the pit prison. And understanding with the burial of this Gog army is it's going to take 7 months to bury it. So an Antichrist has to come to power. So this has to be probably 7 months before to a year and a half before the midpoint of the last 7 years. Well, when does Revelation 9 happen? As you see the chronology, it's still in the days of the trumpets and it's before the midpoint. And so you're going to have a release of all of those demonic spirits that are in with their celestial mafia godfathers out of the pit prison to be released. That then ignites, because it's not part of the first woe, but it's an extension of that first woe in Revelation 9, this 200 million man army of some sort of horrible looking hybrid horses and riders. All are hybrids that aren't human. Well, who needs a soul and a body designed for war? All of these disembodied giant spirits, if they want to interact with the war, who would be one of those? Likely Gog, right? And Gog, even after the flood, as you look at the history of that name of Gog, that comes out of the Herculidean bloodline, the Herculides, as they call it. And these are the Gyges kings. Gyges and Gygus is the root word for giant and giants in plural. Gyes, as that Gyges would be pronounced with the E. So these are Herculidean. That comes from Hercules. Who is Hercules? After the flood, he is the offspring of Alcmene and Zeus, and part of the Cretagens of the royal bloodlines. And so there's many kings after the flood named Gog and Magog in that tradition. So that's, again, how we see the names sort of show up again after the flood through this bloodline of kings that go back to a specific celestial mafia godfather. And so this 200 million man army, people are going to say, you cannot have a bigger army than that, so it has to be Armageddon. Even Christians say that. So they say, well, Revelation obviously isn't in chronological order, but it has to be that big to make everybody believe it's the Armageddon. Otherwise, it may not work. And then the other sort of thing that nails it is Joel 1 and 2. And Joel 1 and 2 is describing this war where the army, and it's a locust army, and it's an army that is the biggest that ever was and ever will be again. It is the biggest. So again, people say, well, that has to be Armageddon, except that Joel 3 says that's when Armageddon comes. So there's another war that follows this war. And then when you put up, and in book 2, I actually put 2 columns in my book when I'm covering this war, and I put in the description of these riders who are destroyed of this locust army. And in some translations, like in the Septuagint, they're going to use that king as his name will be Gog. I kid you not. Who's in charge of the locust armies. And so we have, I'm not sure we can actually make that scriptural connection there, but they also do Agag as Gog as well in the Septuagint, for example. So, but when we look at the description of those riders and their horses, they are identical to Revelation 9. So now we have three applications of a war that looks like an Armageddon war that happens before Armageddon by all of the details that were provided. So, do I think that that's the war? Yes. Do I think he's going to use that and then move his armies, as Luke 21 and Daniel 11 talks about, to do the abomination and kill the two witnesses at the midpoint? Yeah, I think that's his final piece before he creates the abomination.
Wow. Do you think this is connected to the Blue Beam project? I don't know if you've heard of that. Project Blue Beam, where it's the fake
I,
alien invasion.
yeah, I think it's related to that. I think the alien phenomena is a reimagining of what they are, what their intentions will be, what their role will be to deceive us, and say, well, this can't be the end time that's described in the Bible because they're talking about something different. It's just like so warped but it's designed to make us think that way. And we have the preparation ever since I was born in preparing us to accept aliens as being the procreators of the earth in the alien mythos, and that they're returning like watchers, and they're even called watchers, they're even called Anunnaki in the alien mythos, um, to stop us from destroying ourselves from the face of the earth and introduce the new system that can manage the technology lest we destroy the earth.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. So who really holds the reins today? Is it elected leaders, billionaires, secret societies, or religious orders like the Jesuits?
A little bit of both, or a little bit of all, I should say. Um, so it's the bloodlines, and they control the secret societies. They've controlled the religions um, for all throughout our existence, and even up to the last 100 years, where you would have had, like, even the Pope would have all come from nobility bloodlines. Noble comes from Indo-Aryan for the nobility, right? They supplied all of the leaders. So they've been leading us and using sort of that poles apart, us against them ideology in all sorts of ways. The cattle herd us in a specific sort of direction. So they control the religions, they control the secret societies, they have most of the money, and it's all off the books and stored in places like Switzerland and other special locations that nobody can account for how much they have, and where exactly and how to get it out. So they control the world through the money, and they have to control the money to control the agenda that they want. So it's always been part of what they do, which is why they've always dominated the oligarch or corporate class, as we would better understand that today. And so they're working, they would have money that owns most of those large companies, and oligarch companies are going to be like it was of old again, where in the top two classes, they controlled all the big business. They would permit a small entrepreneurial class of bakers and tailors and blacksmiths to service some of their needs. But any of the big companies were controlled by the nobility. And even in modern times, even as you start to settle North America, the big companies like Hudson Bay Company would be a classic way they would control things. And then when that used to be owned by one or two people or a few people, then to fully control and develop, they developed a corporate system, and they just control that through the shares. So they work behind the scenes as an allegorical as they would like to describe them. They're visible, but they're invisible to the rest of the world because they work behind. And so they even use that in their allegories to describe themselves, particularly with the 33 families they like to call themselves the invisible ones. So I think it's all about having control of the education, the religion, and then all the other things that have been developed in the last 100 years, whether it's the scientific community or a couple hundred years with that, and or the AI development or media, social media, all entertainment industry, everything is controlled with their money, and it all promotes their ideology. And that's why it's so amazingly kind of consistent with the application that they use this for, is to control and to brainwash and prepare.
Yeah. Some say the Vatican has a double role, one for public and one for the elite. Do you think that's true? And also, are the Jesuits and the Catholicism connected?
Yeah, some very, very good questions. So we have to understand that a lot of the popes over the years may not have been Christian, and they were put in by the bloodlines. Now, I think there's a conservative Christian wing that is in the church where they would try and fight to get their own people on, but they're always the educated class, no matter which side was fighting for it, and that's who would be representing the church. Now, hopefully, many of those were Christian popes, but we've got a lot of examples of Gnostic popes, so this is not a large stretch. And I think we still see that spiritual war that still goes on in the Roman Church today. And no matter what happens with the Roman Church, I think we will still see a conservative wing of true Christians who will split away once the falling away happens and the universal religion comes, and the liberal side, so to speak, will go with the universal religion because they're the wisdom of the world. That's how they see everything through. The seven sacred sciences. So Jesuits, a lot of people think that they're the top controlling power in the world, just as some people might say the Pope is. And when you have a Jesuit as a Pope with the last one, that sort of combine that and that sort of power. So because we don't know the heart of the Pope that's ever there at a time, we can only look at the actions and what they do. But the organizations we have a little bit more understanding of. So the Jesuits were created to replace the Knights Templar within the Roman Church. The Knights Templar were created to get control of the Roman Church for the bloodlines and to accelerate world government and the new Babylon. And I cover that both in book 1 and in book 2. And I don't cover Jesuits in book 1, but I cover them quite well in book 2. Because just, again, it's that distraction I didn't want in book 1, because most people I didn't think were kind of ready to hear, hey, they fit, but they're not at the top. And now we'll talk a little bit how they fit in. So the royal bloodlines needed to get another organization back in the church, like the Templars. Even though they had the other ones, but no other group had reached that power. Now, Knights of St. John became very powerful and were basically represented up till the 90s with nothing but bloodline members at the top. Surprise, surprise. Um, but not with the power that the Templars had. They were the most powerful military force. They invented modern banking. They controlled all of the major gates within Europe. They were a force unto themselves within the church, complete with papal bull and cooperation before they were taken down. So they needed to replace this within the Roman Church, and they got their opportunity with Ignatius of Loyola, who they're going to pull in and utilize. And he has lots of visions of Mary. He's a Basque and from the nobility as well, because they all were at that time. And so he gets in trouble. Ignatius gets in trouble with the Inquisition, with his preaching of changing the Roman Church from within. And so he gets thrown in jail. And so somebody by the name of Francis Borgia, and if Borgia sounds familiar, yes, that's from the Borgia Pope bloodline, who is also a Basque and is in the royal court of the Holy Roman Emperor of that time, um, is going to bail Ignatius out. This is Francis Borgia who bails him out because he likes his zeal and he likes the way he can speak and organize people. And so he's going to sponsor him through his political, royal, and religious bloodlines and presence, because his grandfather was a pope, right? And there's multiple Borgia popes. And there's two families. There's the Italian and the Spanish one. So this is the Spanish line. So at some point in time, some of the Borgias moved to Spain, but they're still obviously intermarrying because there's kinship there. And that would spread hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's a relationship going on there. And so by 1535, you're going to have the Jesuits put in control of some seminary schools and teaching, right? And they continue to get more power. And by 1550, Francis Borgia is going to become a member of the Jesuits. And in 1565, he's going to become the third Grand Master. So let's examine, before we move on, a little bit more about Mr. Borgia. Well, he's the Grand Master of the Montesa Order. Well, who is the Montesa Order? Well, it's a Knight Order that replaced the Knights Templar in Spain. And the same thing happened in Portugal and other places where the kings said, we don't want the Pope to get all of the Templar assets from our country, so we're going to set up these orders, and they seized those assets. And that was set up in 1317, so 10 years after. And the Montesa Order is continuing, and it's being run at this time by Francis Borgia, who's running basically the Knights Templar which is a different name for the King of Spain. And now he's going to become the third leader of the Jesuits. Well, after he becomes leader, the King of Spain starts making war with the Vatican. They get into a dispute and they invade, and they're virtually bankrupt the Vatican at that point in time. And then the king seizes the Vatican banking from the lower black nobility, like the Medicis were part of before, and converts that over to Jesuit control under not Ignatius of Loyola, but Francis Borgia. And then they move that banking to Switzerland. So you see the royal bloodlines working through their organizations to accomplish their goals. And that's what they do. It's just, has different sort of looks as they go through. So the Jesuits, they interpret everything through the seven sacred sciences. And so they're initiatory order within the Roman Catholic Church, and they have a heavy weight to Egyptian mysticism, which is why you see so much of Egyptians things that are a part of the Jesuit society. So you have an organization that was created by the bloodlines and by what they called themselves at that time the Rosicrucians. So the Rosicrucis order forms after or before the fall of the Templars, with the cutting of the elm ceremonies at Gezer Castle in 1188. Jerusalem fell in 1187. And the senior order to the Knights Templar, which will now become known as the Rosicrucians. These are the barons that um, originally set up the Knights Templar in Jerusalem and nominated um, Godfrey de Bouillon as the first leader and then the first ruler of Jerusalem. He's the Anjou. And then you have Baldwin the first Anjou, de Bouillon's brother, and then his cousin, the second, who was crowned officially as the King of Jerusalem title in 1118 in a small priory on the Rock of Sion, and then officially coronated, like we see even today, where King Charles gets the crown in a private ceremony, and then you have the public one. Well, they did the same thing back then as well. So that would be in the Notre Dame down by Bethlehem, where that big ceremony was happening for the kings of heaven or the kings of Jerusalem. And that uh, in Gezer Castle, you're going to have a splitting of the junior from the senior order. So Huda Payan becomes the first leader of the junior order, officially separated in 1118. And of course, after they get the bull in 1128 for an official order, that continues. So the Grand Masters for the Priory of Sion, which this senior order is, goes back to the first one with the senior group of barons and with Godfrey de Bouillon. And then it picks up in 1188 with at the Gezer Castle with somebody named Sinclair. Uh, and she's the wife of de Gezer. And then you have some de Gezers that are going to be part of these. So it continues with that. And that's why the Priory of Sion doesn't have Grand Masters before that. They're actually the ones that were listed as the Templars because the order was not split at that time between senior and junior. And so when we look at what happens with that splitting of the elm, they're not going to be there, the senior order, to help the Knights Templar because they split because they were upset that they were focused on too many other things than protecting Jerusalem. And so in 1317, we're going to see the first visibility of this senior invisible ones, as they would call themselves at that time. And they show up as 33 invisible ones who are negotiating with the Pope to put the Templars back into the church, but it fails because the Pope wants to have his people on it, not their people on it. And then they poison the Pope. So that gambit fails, but they're always looking to do this. So when they get the opportunity with Ignatius, it's the Rosicrucian order of the 33 invisible ones, which is the 33 families, the Council of 33 families that we see today. And they're going to create the Committee of 300 afterwards below them and the Rosicrucians that will carry that name, which is why the Rosicrucians have that red cross, because they're the ones in that senior order and the ancient order that gave it to the Templars, right? So that's why that continues. So the Jesuits answer into the organizational structure through the bloodlines. So it's just a matter of what trunk organization they're going to be going into. And we also have to factor in today that it is the junior Black nobility versus the senior Black nobility that sponsored the resurgence of the Jesuits in the late 1800s after they were disbanded in the early 1800s because they had gone rogue and were assassinating the royals around Europe and starting wars, and they had their kind of went with their own agenda. So they made sure it was taken down. But as the royals were putting popes into prison, they decide we're going to bring back the Jesuits, and they get the backing of the junior Black nobility. Who's that? Those are the bankers that lost the banking to the royals, right? So if it's the junior Black nobility that they answer to, then it would go into the Committee of 300. If they're still answering to the original royals, they would go into the Council of 33. So that's where they fit in. They're important. They will create the new Babylon. There will be a split in the church, I think. They will move their, I think they will move their headquarters from Vaticanus Hill to Palatine Hill, which was the original seat of idolatry with the seven Septimonian hills in the old city, um, and home of the Sibylline prophecies. Vaticanus Hill was outside the old city and would have been considered in ancient times, and up to even into early Roman times, it was a branch of the Sibylline um, religion and a branch location on Vaticanus Hill, but a branch, not the center. So look for that to go back to, and with that split back to Palatine Hill.
Wow. Is that in Greece? That is, isn't it? Is that Palatine Hill
No,
in
that's in
Greece?
Rome.
Rome. Oh, okay, okay. Rome. Sorry.
No, it's
Yes,
in
Rome.
Rome, city of Rome.
Yeah.
Seven hills of Rome, as Babylon sits on in the book of Revelation. But the Sibylline religion was not only pre-Roman, but it was Etruscan, the Proto, the Indo-Aryans that were there before the descendants of Japheth moved amongst. It was in Greece and in southern Greece, and also as far as in Anatolia or Asia Minor. But, and I cover this off in the book too, how it gets the Sibylline gets established in Rome in the time of Hannibal, who is invading them, and they seek the assistance of the Greeks, and they move the Sibylline stone and the prophecies to Palatine Hill, again, an ancient Sibylline location, and stays there. And so I think um, we should look at a split that will come. And a lot of people think, well, it's just the whole Roman Church, but that's just not how things kind of work. It's not that all, to say all Catholics aren't Christian is kind of not really acceptable. It's just a different church. The leadership, yeah, people can talk all they want about the leadership. They should be evaluated based on what they do, but we should be careful about how we apply who Babylon is and what will likely happen as part of the falling away.
You mentioned Sinclair. Is that Hillary Clinton's line?
I have not done a genealogical research to take her back to the Sinclairs, but I think because she was put into some, um, powerful opportunities, there must be some sort of genealogical connection there, whether
Definitely.
it's them or another family. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So the Rodhams, I can't say that I've done any genealogical research on that family.
I see.
Maybe
Wow.
if she had become president, I might have, but
Wow. Well, I think we'll leave it here, Gary. Um, it's been amazing everything that you just unpacked for us. Oh my gosh. Thank you again for being here and your time and your insights and the depth of your research. It's always appreciated. I know the audience really values it. But before we wrap up, can you let everyone know where they can find your work, how to get copies of both volumes of your Genesis 6 conspiracy books, and if there's anything new that you're working on that we should keep an eye out on?
yeah. So if people are wondering whether or not there's anything that's sort of new on my schedule, look for me to be in Dallas at the end of October at the Truthers Conference. So if people want to come see me live, and um, still looking for the details as to, is it one day of speaking or 2 days of speaking, but I will have a booth that's set up. Um, so that's the major thing that's on my schedule for a travel perspective. Um, Not that I'm not busy, because I remain very, very busy, as you mentioned. And no, I've not had time to work on book 3, but have for the rest of the year, I've scaled back with the amount of shows that I'm doing. I'm trying to keep it down to 3 or 4 a week to create
It's a
some
lot.
time for that. Yeah. And so, and I do have a couple other projects I'm working on. I'm not ready to speak about that. But yeah, look for me to be trying to work on some things and still still do interviews, but not be totally interview focused, so I can get a few more things done.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Gary. Truly, your generosity with your time, your knowledge, and your heart doesn't go unnoticed. Every time you come on, you challenge us with to think deeper, to question more, and to see the bigger picture. And I know how much time and research goes into your work, and I appreciate that. So thank you. Really means a lot to me and to the entire community. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And hopefully, and I know prophecy is a very confusing area, and there's a lot of different approaches that are out there. One of the things I'm going to be spending more time on is to try and have people take a step back from the standard preconceived conclusion approaches of prophecy that seems to be driving all of their manipulation and interpretation of scripture to arrive at their end is to show people how you can understand prophecy. There's a lot of work to it, but if you know how to start building on it and putting it together, it'll start to make some sense. And you'll be able to see all of the red flags that the other approaches utilize. And, they leave out inconvenient passages. And if they're forced to deal with those inconvenient passages, then they have to reinvent what it says. So you can't believe what it says. They'll say, well, it's in there. You just can't see it because you don't rightly divide. And they use all sorts of words to say, okay, well, maybe they know more than I do. If it's not written there, it's not there. And but those types of things just to sort of help people out. And nobody's ever going to agree 100% on things in prophecy because you have to wait for confirmation to see how things are fulfilled. But it's just does not make sense to me that understanding prophecy should only be for the educated elite and then how they want to interpret it to whatever wisdom of the world and belief system that they're pushing. It just makes no sense to me that that would be the case, and it's not. And Jesus actually shows us how to do it, but that's why they have to change what he says. Because if you focus on placing all prophecy around what Jesus said, then you're going to arrive at completely different um, chronology of events than what all of these preconceived conclusion approaches do. But if you go in with a preconceived conclusion, you are going to be biased by that. So I let my biases in my approach to go to what does the Word of God say? Put everything
True.
around what he says, not vice versa.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. Sorry, I know you're on vacation. I'm so sorry.
It's
And
okay. It's okay. It's been fun. And I'm still doing shows from the lake. I just can't do the video at this point in time,
yeah.
but no, I'm so happy to come in and talk to the audience and hopefully connect a few more dots for people.
Yes, for sure. And maybe next time we can talk into a little bit more about the secret society and their structure, maybe. I know you were talking a little bit about
Sure.
it now, but yeah, later we can get
Yeah,
in.
and again, people don't fall for the wisdom of the world and the propaganda in terms of the structure that they give you, because as you start trying to piece in all of these organizations, it doesn't work. So you have to have a model. So I use their model from
Mhm.
and it allows all of that complexity to fit in. So yeah, October 10th, I think we'll record that, and as we're scheduled, and it'd be a good topic.
Yay. Well, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your family and your
I
time
will.
with them.
Thank
You, Gary. Take care. See you soon. I want to thank Gary Wayne for sharing his time and insights with us today. Even while on vacation, Gary joined us via audio. So mahalo, Gary, for doing that for us. You can find Gary's work at Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis, the number 6conspiracy.com. And his books will be in the episode description below. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please follow, subscribe, and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts. And share this episode with someone who loves outside the box conversations like this. Your reviews and shares truly help the show reach new listeners. So thank you guys for that. And if you got any questions or guest ideas, please drop them in the comments below. Until the next time, aloha and take care. Bye.
You say who you are, and I've noticed. If I fall apart, could you hold this? You got me digging way too deep in the feelings, and I'm over here looking for all the reasons. So if you're gonna stick around, and if you plan to hold me down, be patient, 'cause I'm finding out. Yeah, don't wanna mess up. I can't lose your love. I can't get enough. And I'ma keep my heart right by my side. Yeah, I can act tough. Don't need all the love. You got me messed up. Matter of fact, you might just be surprised, yeah. So if you're gonna stick around, and if you plan to